Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Christ consciousness. Well, I want to cover an issue here that I hear all the time, and I think so many other people have as well. And of course, because of the urban legend that has been linked to it and the buffoonish, uneducated stooges that talk about it, coming from their pure, usually loving Christian backgrounds. And of course, they don't want to hear from someone like me. They want a little troll that they can kind of step on and who, yes, sir, I agree with you. So they're not going to get that from me. I'm going to tell them the truth of it, the gnosis of it. So you're only going to hear it from a responsible researcher. Who are they other than me? There is a couple out there. There's a couple of people that seem to get it. And everyone should, I will be talking about some of these people in the future. I'm still researching how much they get in one person. But finding truth in someone who looks at the facts and is stating or looking for the solution, the truth of it, is as rare as hen's teeth, as the old cliche goes. So, by the way, hens don't have teeth. That's why it's rare. Get it? Okay. So the whole idea, Aleister Crowley, and it's pronounced Crowley. A lot of people say Crowley, etc. And it's he used to state that it was like Holy Crowley. Okay, so that's the correct way to pronunciate his name. Now, this guy, who was basically a nobody for all of his existence, because he died in 1947? Somehow, and somebody, December 1st, 1947, he was born October 12th, 1875. So he died a couple of years after World War II and was a strange person, as pretty much most rich people are. They're self-centered, arrogant scumbuckets that want to do nothing but put more money in their pocket and pay as little as possible. This guy has a very odd background because basically his parents were similar to what we would call in the United States born-again Christians. They were in this radical Christian cult, and they made their money off of selling beer. Apparently in a new kind of way, little kiosks or something, and they made a fortune that way, and they left him a lot of money, which is very interesting that he would come from such a background. He had a typical rich kid background and went through, I guess, what did they call them? Public schools in Britain, or what we call private schools. But he went through all these highfalutin public schools in Britain, which are nothing more than debauchery factories. I mean, they put a whole there. Generally, they are sexually independent. What am I trying to think of? They're segregated. So there's just a bunch of boys together. And the problem is these schools aren't just teenagers. They have pretty much the whole gamut of children there. So you're mixing in 8, 10-year-olds, maybe younger, in with 13, 14, 15-year-old little horny buggers. So the whole idea is you've got this giant buggery going on, which is so classic of the Brits. And what's kind of amusing with Britain, since they're known for their homosexuality, but homosexuality was a crime until 1969. As a matter of fact, they murdered through what is it called? Chemical castration, the guy who broke the Nazis' code and figured that out. He was gay, and they caught him propositioning a gay prostitute. I think he kind of earned that. He saved how many? Potentially hundreds of thousands, even millions of Allied forces. Probably would have been mostly Americans, because where were the Brits? But the bottom line is that is amusing. It was illegal until 1968 in Germany, a country which has a homosexual population because of their basic Middle Eastern roots of about 70% are bi or homosexual. And I would think that it's very similar to that in Britain. I mean, this is part of a phase they went through. But, a lot of these private school situations or public school situations are very similar to what ancient sexuality was, like the Spartans did and the samurais. Well, it was just part of growing up, and that's just what you did as a warrior in the field and had a helper that you also helped you below the belt. So a lot of these things people don't understand, but this is something that continues to go on. And I don't know how much of the homosexual law was enforced in these countries, but I don't think so. Of course, the actual National Socialists, otherwise known as the Nazis, murdered tens of thousands of German homosexuals and threw them into camps, etc. The SS used to shoot SS soldiers they found that were homosexual. Which was quite a bit. So the whole idea is that all of this is what went on. And of course, most of them were also married to Jews, by the way. Ain't that interesting factoid? So the whole idea is that Aleister Crowley has been villainized, so forth. Now, I did a whole bunch of talk on him. You can look that up in my YouTube channel here and get a longer explanation. And what I concluded at the end of it is, was Aleister Crowley a Satanist? Now, what I really meant to say there, and I said yes because he did evil magic, because that's what Satanists generally do, even though it's the higher path if you're a pervert and a deviant. So, it's better than molesting children, which a lot of them do anyway, but that's another point. But the point is that it's such a bizarre thing to go from one side of the aisle to the other. But, you know, it's kind of like the Democratic, Republican one party that it is. How do you say that if you're a Satanist and you then go to a Christian church, one is better than the other? I've known a lot of Christians, and they are evil. I mean, very evil, hate-filled, and they're controlled by all the evil forces out there very easily because they're cowards. So the bottom line is that we have to... Now, what was he? So let me refine this because I'm a little tired of hearing this. I've read most of his works and forgotten them very quickly after that. Most of his works are pretty boring. He did write a book on magic, practical ceremonial magic. All of that came from the Golden Dawn, which he was a member of in the first level. Once he completed the first level, they threw him out. They didn't like him. He was a weirdo. He's unbalanced. Oh, well, that was a good move. But he didn't find anything. He didn't invent anything. There are no new practices that he's ever done. Now, we do know of him because of buggery in youth, and I'm assuming this is happening with a lot of any society that does that. Oh, by the way, the Tibetans do that as well. They take children at 10 years old in their monasteries to teach them the way and mix them in with people that are teenagers, etc. What do you think's going on? You just don't hear about it. What do you think's going on there? So that's why I don't have much use for Tibetans, Buddhists, or anybody else. Yes, their philosophy is better, kinda. But on the other hand, they're doing the same thing everybody else does. And try and look up some Buddhist priests from Thailand who are known to be drunkards and horrors. And I love to, maybe I'll post some of their pictures. They're sucking on cigarettes all the time. How divine. Yes, let's bow to that. Bow to the pack of Marlboros. So the whole idea is that these are the type of things that they do, not to mention a waste of money. Shouldn't a Buddhist monk be using that money for eating or giving to the poor? No. Marbles. So all the way it goes is that's very typical. So he didn't know anything. Now, because he was rich, he was able to get away with a lot. And like most rich people, if you've ever been around them, most people kiss their butt. For some reason or another, people think that rich people will open their wallet and some $100 bills will float into the sky and you'll be able to grab it. People tend to want to help successful people because they think they're going to get something out of it. You don't want to help the guy broken down on the side of the road with a car that's rusting out and dirty kids in the back. Oh, no, you don't want to help them. They need help. Now, you want to help the rich guy in the Cadillac help change his tire because, after all, he may drop a penny near you. Ooh. And I've known many super rich celebrities, super rich people that don't have a Malibu. Scum. So, the bottom line is that that's how rich people are. So, he falls in that category. Now, I believe that he was a homosexual, but he couldn't admit. He came out and said, well, I can't come out as a homosexual because it's illegal. Look what they did to this guy, who I guess was a famous writer at the time, forget his name. But the bottom line is that, so he wasn't going to do that. The fact that, you know how many homosexuals have children? It's Very, very easy. And it certainly is easy enough to perform to the point of getting somebody pregnant as well. So it's not like you can't perform at all. And gays on both sides have super high libidos, lesbians and homosexuals. So if it's even possible to have higher than the average male, but it's true, it's probably double. So, and this goes for this to the as well with lesbians. It's very interesting, and that's a whole other subject. But the bottom line is that he was having this consistently with all the time, and he, from what I understand, he was also in the very much of the submissive part, because that was part of his personality for this type of act, that he was the receiver and not the giver. And this happened all the time. He actually built it into the O.T.O, which, the O.T.O, this terrible. Well, again, these are not satanic classic organizations. Now, Satanism is reverse Christianity and is the worship of the entity known as Satan or Lucifer. That's what Satanism is. Now, some people call themselves Satanists, like Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, but they really were agnostics, from what I understand. Nihilists is another word. They believed in nothing. They used that as kind of a funny little thing to gain attention. And if you look at all those old pictures, as I've been recently, of the Church of Satan, I mean, Anton LaVey's running around with a hat with little horns on it. It's kind of comical. I mean, I've never seen, which he may have, but I haven't seen Michael Aquino, who's a little more, he ran around because he was also into the vampire thing, which his wife ran the vampire temple in the Temple of Set. But he made himself look like the character out of Dark Shadows, because he started doing that after he started watching the TV show in reruns on TV. So he had this Eddie Munster look, this haircut, this black outfit. It was very much of a macho look, not with little horns on it. But I don't know if he ever did, probably did. But, I mean, how ridiculous is that? Everybody that there are pictures with that have that, they're wearing this little horns, which I think further shows the kind of stupidity of Anton LaVey and his ridiculous thing. He got people to follow him because there was humping and dope. It's as simple as that. It's not too difficult to draw a crowd if you're going to offer them dope and naked people and orgies, which I'm still trying to confirm the fact that that's what the naked altar was about. But, you're going to get a lot of people just to show up to stare at somebody naked. And by the way, it was a trend, I don't know when that was, the 80s or 90s, I think it was the 90s, that in Japanese restaurants, they would have a naked girl that they would place the food on, that would be your table. You find objections to that? Well, it was a big thing. Nobody screamed that they were Satanists. So the whole idea is we have to be careful here as we keep labeling people with the emphasis by those people who don't like him, which are the Christians, the most corrupt people on the planet, or all the religions for that matter. So classically, he was not a Satanist, but, he liked to play games, and he did things to gain attention, which he wasn't very successful. His books didn't sell. He was more interested in writing pornography poems, I believe, which nobody wanted to publish. But he has books and books of these things. He wrote other books as well. He did all sorts of things because he was a rich guy, and he could get away with it. He didn't really need to worry about money. So one of the ways that he could play further was to do this ritual stuff, and attracted kind of a bunch of really mentally ill rich girls around him. So, and of course, a lot of gay guys who kind of fell in love with him, which is what his biographer did, the guy who carried on after him. In terms of the rest of the stuff, most of the stuff that he wrote was kind of very boring and preachy. People want to pick out certain things, like from his Practical Magic book, where it talks about the sacrifice of a male baby. And, these things are thrown in there. I think Anton LaVey did the same thing. And, of course, he took it from, because Anton LaVey didn't have an original idea in his life. This guy didn't even graduate high school. He's a carny. He put on a show. And people may say, like... Michael Aquino, this guy was brilliant. He wasn't brilliant and self-educated. He didn't come up with anything. The Satanic Bible was 80% plagiarized. Not even plagiarized. It was copied from other people. He had a very little to say after that. The other books he wrote were all pretty low-level cult books. There was really nothing intellectual there, which is another reason why I wonder about Michael Aquino, who in one side of his mouth claims what a wonderful intellectual guy this was. And I had to say to myself, did you meet him? He certainly wasn't intellectual in any way whatsoever. He was trying to make money, and this was a way that he did for a little while, but you're flagging a dead horse. You're flailing at, because you're not going to find a huge group of people that will publicly admit to this unless there's something in it for them. But they're never going to publicly. There's been satanic orders going around for hundreds of years, the Hellfire Club, etc. And I'm not sure these were what you consider satanic organizations. They were more basically swinger parties, because all of these things really were an excuse, like Wicca turned into be, for orgies. So Wicca's, the grand rite, was when the priestess of the coven had sex with everybody. And of course, that makes covens grow. And of course, everybody had to be naked, as Gardner said. God forbid looking at him. But the whole idea is that this is what happened. So Crowley has gotten this. I'm the wickedest man in the world. Okay. That got the press, didn't it? Everybody knows that. And it gained attention. And he was sued on several occasions, I think 6 or 7 occasions, and he was so magically powerful that he only won one of those cases. So he was never able to sway anybody in his direction. And we have proof. I mean, there are so many people that have written about this, really nobody, who didn't really have much empowerment, that he left a legacy because he was rich. He published all his own books. Most of them never sold. And then somehow in the 60s, through the mishmash of crap that the British were doing at that time, he came to their attention. And people liked it because he was the outlaw. How you could find any great philosophy there is hard to believe. But it did condone certain sexualities, a different way of thinking, and of course, negative or left-hand path occultism, which is self-centered, egotistical occultism, of course, was what the 60s generation was all about. So I don't know what they think is profound, but I've never heard anybody state something profound that Aleister Crowley stated. Now, the big thing that everybody states is do what thou wilt. Now, this is another thing that's been totally and completely misunderstood. Some people add to it, and I don't know if he said that really or not. It's like so many things, that which does not kill you makes you stronger, opened up in the Conan movie. Now, that was not the exact quote that Nietzsche stated. I'm not sure what it was, but that was another typical changed version. And do what thou wilt, a lot of people add under love there. But they're missing it as well, because do as thou wilt is nothing wrong with that if you understand the context that was stated. Now, do what thou wilt meant is do your higher self will. Don't follow society. Don't do what they say. Do what you believe in, and so forth. So I think that's quite a good philosophy. These are a lot of things that were misunderstood. Kind of Nietzsche said the same thing. Nietzsche's another guy that people totally and completely misunderstand, somehow thinking that this is some sort of Nazi philosophy, when Nietzsche was long dead when the Nazis took over. Now, his sister apparently worked with the Nazis, but he was dead, and apparently towards the end of his life went goo-goo and was in a mental house in a rubber room. But he said similar. Now, the Uberman, which is just a German term meaning over, bigger, larger, left, right, it means everything. Typical of European languages that are non-English in nature, it's interpreted depending on the sentence, the paragraph, or even the page, or even the book. So Uber is a term meaning over, and you can interpret that the over self, the higher self, whatever you want to do. But his interpretation of the Uberman was someone who did who worked for a higher purpose, who didn't work within society and say, well, yeah, let's go to church, let's go to this, let's go to that. And the statement that God is dead was the fact that mankind was not following religion. It wasn't that he said God was dead. He said in the fact that, look, mankind is pretty evil and rotten. God is dead to the people. They're not doing anything about it. So the whole idea is we need to go past that then. So, of course, there's your little lesson, your philosophical lesson for the day. Aren't you happy now? But these are the important things that you need to know, because people use terminology, they talk stuff. So do what thou will was, oh, do it anything you want, man. And immediately, being Christians, oh yeah, well, what I would do if I wanted, if I could, if I get away with it, I'd rape, rob, and kill. Just like all the Christians before me have done. So the whole idea is that you can really, when you say a statement like that and people say, do what you will, well, you're thinking negative. Why? Because you are negative. So why wouldn't you interpret that as good things happening? You know, I've always wondered when the Highlander, a movie I think everybody has seen, which were good movies, they were fun. But the fact that this guy was stabbed in battle and he should have died, they didn't say that he was Jesus. They didn't say he was a good guy. Well, if you survive in battle, certainly the good guys don't do this. I mean, this is throughout Norse mythology, and they've always wondered, well, how come you let the greatest warriors die in battle? How come the good guys die in battle? And this was always a question, and any warrior would understand this. But they didn't say they didn't kneel down saying he was Jesus. They grabbed their weapons and said that you're Satan because nothing good can happen from our gods. So it's important to understand these type of things that are out there into the bigger picture of it all. So Aleister Crowley was a little bad boy, a little typical stuck-up, nasty little Brit who did whatever he felt like because he had the money, used as many people as he could, and he wasn't going to walk around carrying the cross. You know, I always find it amusing as if you are in certain public areas, there's always some jerk, if you're hanging around long enough, that is carrying a big cross. Usually they have a wheel on the back end of it. I don't think Jesus had that, but they have a wheel, and they're walking from city to city carrying the cross. So, and we all know that crucifixion was not done that way. There weren't big enough trees to do that. Most likely people were crucified on X's, which were much smaller. And of course, we need to be reminded of some fake symbol every time you go to a Christian church. And secondly, well, of course, the cross isn't unique to them. Blah, 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 blah. But the bottom line is that we need to understand that. So the Ordo Temporalis Orientis, the O.T.O, was something that was a German organization. So because they were having certain problems and they thought that Aleister Crowley would bring money in there. They kind of turned that organization over to it. The leadership was getting old. They were running into problems. And in the occult industry, so to speak, he was well known. And people really thought that he was going to... I don't know how many people have ever worked with rich people, but they don't put their money in nothing. They'll take your money. They'll ask for investments. I'm rich. See, you can be rich too. Give me your money. So the point is they brought him in thinking that he would do it. And he did have certain influences. They wanted to grow their organization into Great Britain, etc. But it was this old, confused, bottled up nonsense. They tried to tie themselves into the Templars and everything else. Of course, the Templars did everything good and bad, which is, of course, ridiculous. This is a military group, and whatever you want to say about the Templars, they gave their lives for 200 years fighting for a cause, living in a hellhole of the Middle East, or working in businesses. So very few people have that commitment. So we need to understand that. So he took it over, and then he did his Crowley thing to it. Now, you got to remember that people want to say he was bisexual or this. I believe he was homosexual. And every chance he had to put homosexuality in. Of course, it was even illegal in Germany, where the O.T.O was, and how they got away with it being part of their doctrine, I don't know. But the O.T.O has all this old stuff in it, which they claim came from some old Middle Eastern Templar rituals, which were not sexual in nature, but the Gnostic Mass, all these type of things, which have these things. And if you read a book on the O.T.O, particularly the introductory books, it's all flowers and roses. The problem is, Crowley came in and put the N degrees there. Now, the highest degrees of the O.T.O were sexual degrees. And the sexual degrees starts out, number 1 is masturbation. So he really laid it out, so he covered everything. And the bottom line is that he also, the second degree, and I don't know how they worked all this stuff out, but I'm assuming that's part of the appeal of the O.T.O. Well, I don't know whom they're having sex with. Well, obviously masturbation, it's yourself. After that, I don't know if they're setting up partners. Where do they get the partners? They have, what is there, the prostitute of the O.T.O lodge you're going to? Because you're generally not going to find people that are going to be sleeping around that much in general. So I don't know where all this comes from. I always wondered about that. I went to an O.T.O meeting in Los Angeles one time and talk about Freakville. So it was like being in a Fellini movie. So the whole idea is that there certainly was nothing there but deviates. The bottom, and then the last degree, the highest degree that you can reach is homosexual magic. So how can you join that order without at least being a bisexual? Now, I guess you don't have to go through all the degrees. I don't know what's required, but most people join an organization and want to go as high as they can. And you can always test it. I had a guy many years ago tell, oh, with the O.T.O and everything else. I said, how's the buggering going? Then he put on, it was like when many, many years ago when I was on Facebook, then he started posting pictures of beautiful women on his Facebook page. Yeah, cover it up, baby. So the whole idea is that that's typically Crowley. Now, is that satanic? No. That's a bisexual, homosexual slant. And that's the problem when you're in the order. What is the person who's at the top doing? So if the person at the top is gay, you're going to have a lot of gay influences, and they're going to think nothing of adding in their preferences. It's just kind of natural. So where does that leave you in the organization? And the O.T.O is very typically, they never talk about their sexual degrees. And that's one thing I hate about the O.T.O is the fact that they hide that. They want to get you involved, fill your head with fancy flowers and nice smells, and then they want to throw you in a door to be buggered. So I don't know how it all works, but and so forth. So, and of course, he was very happy to be involved in all these things and get involved in sex magic and other things. And I'm not sure how all this worked or not. He, as I said, he managed to hook up with a lot of very wealthy and crazy women, and I believe one of them had a baby, and the baby died or something. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure that has any great importance. But he was married at least twice. Rose Edith Kelly from 1903 to 1909, not exactly 6 years. And then after that, he wasn't married again. He married again Maria Teresa Sanchez in 1929. I'm not sure. Doesn't say how long they were married. So, what's interesting about him, and I don't know if anybody's ever checked this out, I find it hard to believe you can access it, but apparently, he died in 1947 at the age of 72. It's not too bad. He was a drug addict, and this was part of the problem. So he spent a lot of money on drugs, which is typical of rich people having. Now it's cocaine and other things. I think he was a heroin addict, but his ashes buried in Hampton, New Jersey. Well, if anybody could check that out, it would be interesting if someone could go to his grave. Can you? I don't know. I would think not, because people are going to, it's probably cause a lot of trouble there, but I don't know. So, he was also, few people understand that he was a mountaineer. He had asthma on top of it. So he wasn't this flop as much as people think he was. The fact is he climbed high mountains and wanted to climb Everest, but they wouldn't let him at that time. It was a political situation. Not him personally, but I don't think they were allowing anybody to do that. So he used to climb mountains. He studied Hindu and Buddhist practices in India. And of course, he spent a lot of time in Cairo, Egypt. And you're talking about at the 1900s. So this is when all these things were pretty, still pretty primitive back then. And of course, when he was in Egypt, he made contact with an entity called AWAS. So I've covered all that stuff, but I mean, if you want to read all that stuff, that's fine. My point is that all his practical, magical information came from the Golden Dawn, who put together this whole system. Now, the Golden Dawn was not a historical organization. They were basically a bunch of British flops, writers. I'm sure most of them were probably gay and liked to wear funny little outfits and prance around. There was a lot of that going on, and a lot of occultism is about this costume dress-up stuff, which I never got into. I don't even like wearing robes and stuff. I always used to wear t-shirts with some sort of magical design on it. But they were big into this. Remember, these are the rich flops. So the whole idea is that they put together a system of magic from the available literature, and the Golden Dawn system is pretty good for ritual magic. It's pretty much the foundation of everything here, but there's nothing intrinsically authentic about it. It was taken from many things. So he used a lot of drugs. He did all the things that came with that, and the fact that he was the nastiest guy around. But he was never linked to any pedophilia. He was never linked to any kind of sacrifices of animals or anything like that. He liked to be known as this dangerous man. So who do you want? What gains you more of attention? I'm the evilest man in the world, or I am Mr. Nice. Hey, let's go see Mr. Nice. What? Mr. Nice? What is he going to do? Give us an Oreo? Well, you can go see Mr. Devil. Ooh, that's pretty cool. Let's go see the evil guy. So the whole idea is that's how people's minds work. People want to hear about the Earth ending. Earth changes. We're all going to collapse. California is going to split away from the rest of the country, as Casey predicted in 1969 at the San Andreas Fault. And people buy thousands and thousands of Earth change maps. I was one of them. But I put that up in my institute at the time. But the whole idea is that it is, it is fascinating to think about. And it could happen. So, these are all things I think. So Aleister Crowley was not a classic Satanist. He didn't worship anybody or anything. He made up his own religion of Thelema. And he had his own basic codes. He played out just like, of course, where Michael Aquino got his stuff from. Well, he went to the Egyptian stuff. That was very popular back then. There were all sorts of, it's a sophisticated, I mean, look what the Egyptians did. You can't say they're bums. They're stupid. Well, look at all the things they built. So it was very popular back then, particularly in the 1920s, etc., when there was a massive interest in Egypt. And it had this sophistical, but it had a sophisticated system and a higher God hierarchy. Can't talk right now. So the whole idea is that there were books and everything else written on this, and European God form systems were never overly interested in. People tried to get into the Druids, and the problem is there's virtually nothing there to discover. All the Druids and their information were killed by the Romans. People then tried to go out from there, but there's very little information when you really get down to it, and not much has been uncovered. So if you want to get into a Celtic, Anglo-Saxon, or even Nordic religion systems, well, there's really nothing there. Certainly practices, all that stuff was destroyed. Nobody really knows what was going on with all those things. So, as a general person, I mean, he was not, apparently he treated people horribly. Several people committed suicide. He wouldn't, I think one person was either sick or having problems when he had his mini retreat in Italy. And he refused to pay for them and bring doctors in. And I believe somebody died or something happened there. Well, that's him. All his stuff was very sexually based. He was into sex and drugs. So he made sure he did that. Now, again, him being powerful, well, he lost, of all the rituals we know he's done, very few of them, if any, less than 1% were ever successful. Certainly, he was trying to get a lot of sex going on, either any way he could get it. He was known to frequent prostitutes. Again, is that a big power where you have to pay for sex? He couldn't get it within his organization or convince some of these psycho rich women he was involved with. And he used to do that all the time. And the reason he would do that is to use the sacred mixture, which is the mixture of your male fluids with the female fluids, which you then would consume after the act. So he's very big into that and thought this was one of the elixirs of life. And this is considered to be a powerful energy even to this day. So there's a lot of sex involved, a lot of people, and he treated people horribly because he was a rich scumbucket. Is there anything terrible he's done? Anything to do with that? Well, not that we can really tie him to. To overly, I see this today that people take everything so literally. I'm the wickedest man in the world. And they took that this guy was some hardcore Satanist, sacrificing babies and killing people. It's just not true. Just like Charles Manson never killed anybody. So the whole idea is what you think happened is not what happened. So Crowley was into everything. He was into a lot of sex, obviously, built it into his groups and religion. And when they didn't have sex, like the O.T.O didn't have these, he made sure he put it in. And he made sure he got everything in there. How complete of him. He was in sadomasochistic relationships. So this guy, this was what he was into. Along with all of the other things. They have linked him to the British intelligence agency during World War II, etc. But everybody, people think this is strange. Oh yeah, he was, the government was running him to destroy the world. He was the father, he was the real father of Michael Aquino. Yep, now you know. So the whole idea is that these are the kind of things that happen. This is a world war where people are fighting for their survival. Anybody who had international contacts, and he had a lot of contacts in Germany, people would talk to. They do this today. Almost everybody works for the FBI and CIA that has any kind of knowledge. And Disney was a big FBI informant, Walt Disney, and so many other people. So if you know anybody, they're going to approach you and say, hey, look, keep your eyes open. Do this for your country. So that's considered a CIA operative. Now, I don't know. They asked Dennis Rodman when he went to North Korea to spy for them. So this is so typical. So that's what happens. You're not really a CIA agent. From what I understand, from people that have told me they've worked for certain people, they don't help you at all. So if you come under some sort of attack or harassment, boop, boop, bye-bye, and they don't pay you. What a deal. You're doing it for your country, or for, I should say, for the corporations, so they can give $40 billion to Nazis to fight a fake war. Yeah, well, that's nice. While your cities are in decay and there are millions of homeless and people can't afford medical care. We don't have the money. So this is absurd, but these are the type of things that happen. So, we need to fully understand the outward image and who this guy was. And nobody really paid attention to him, as I said. None of his books sold. Most of his books were pornographic enough that nobody would touch them. And he tried to sell them himself and print them and so forth. And none of these things ever sold. And I'm not sure who owns some of his other books. The American O.T.O claims ownership of things. I don't know how that really is true, but they do claim that out of San Francisco, where the main office is. And if you use their stuff, they will contact you. I was contacted by them once because I used a little bit of that from some author. But the bottom line is that that is the story there in terms of his actual ownership of so many things. But the bottom line is that he was not a traditional pray to Satan, worship the devil, sacrifice animals or people, or was into pedophilia. None of this has ever surfaced. The worst thing to say about his sexuality is his manipulation of others and the fact that he was definitely a person with strong homosexual leanings. And of course, this played out as bisexual because of the laws. But that's about it. Was he tracked doing anything horrible and terrible? Were there some strange things in his books about sacrifices? Well, that's all being sexy. That's all gaining attention. Just like grimoires. You won't find a grimoire, and I've translated all of them, that doesn't have overtones of sexuality and human and animal sacrifice. And by the way, human and animal sacrifice, particularly animal sacrifice, is the way of the entire world. The Ark of the Covenant. Heard that? Well, you know what the Ark of the Covenant was fed to keep it empowered? Matzah bread? I don't think so. Manischewitz wine? Not really. Hundreds of animals were sacrificed every day to the Ark of the Covenant. You haven't heard that, have you? Well, that's what's there. And Judaism is a pagan religion filled with animal sacrifice to this day. Conservative rabbis will kill chickens for your sins. They do it every year, every day. And that's part of the ancient or bad part. Your Catholics eat flesh and drink blood. Your Baptists drink grape juice, which is supposed to signify blood. Because Canticula is all in the Catholic Church. So the whole idea is that this is the reality of it. So let's get clear here. I just saw a special on Hunza, northern Pakistan, with the people there and their shamans, which is heavily linked to Muslims as well. But their shamans sacrifice animals. It goes on and on and on. People like to blame hoodoo, voodoo, Santeria. This goes on all over the world, and people are supposed to just look the other way when it's the Jewish or the Catholics or anything else. So symbolizing eating flesh and drinking blood, as Catholics do in the Eucharistic Mass, is just as bad as doing it. Isn't that what the Catholics tell you? Thinking it in your mind, just like committing it. So this is the kind of nonsense that you hear. So let's get that clear. And he wasn't linked to any of that I'm aware of. And certainly the sources of people who claim this or that. The claim that he was protected, well, he got into a magical battle with McGregor's, whatever his name is. And he sent over spirits that set his house on fire and got his maid to come after him with a knife. Ooh, Mr. Power. And he knew he was under attack, but he couldn't defend himself against McGregor's attacks. God, he's powerful. So the whole idea is that these are the kind of things that go time and time when you look into this. Now, he has his own little philosophy, which is so boring and so drab that I can't really read the Book of Laws without any kind of seriousness, and I don't find any of it practical. I may get back into it someday, but who cares? And what did he do? Nothing. What did he leave? Nothing. The fact that he left around a sex club is not surprising again. So this is anytime you start a sex club, it's not too hard to keep it going, especially if you endorse drugs with that. So this is all part of what's happening there. So the whole image that this guy was a drooling from the mouth, a hardcore pedophilia Satanist, as we have the same kind of things as we look at Charles Manson, who was basically just a pimp and to a certain extent an honorable guy, believe it or not, and I'll talk about that in other things. But the bottom line is that's totally misunderstood to make a false conclusion of it by those that are twisting it for their own personal preferences. Now, the bottom line is that's all it is. And he didn't leave much of anything in these systems. A lot of people love his practical book of magic because it is written pretty well and it talks about the Golden Dawn system and gives you a good foundation. It's a pretty good practical magic book. But there's nothing odd or strange there. It's just the first level of the Golden Dawn that he took and published, which he wasn't supposed to. That's it. And it's good information. The rest of it is a bunch of psychobabble. He put in whatever he felt like doing. He was a horrible drug addict at the end of his life, and for what I understand, finally used up all his money. It wasn't as much as we think, but there was certainly plenty of money there. And he ultimately died fairly poor, and he was a drug addict, etc. So that's all part of the ultimate conclusion to Aleister Crowley. I could spend hours going into his work and what he talked about, etc., but it's really not that important. There's really nothing there, but you should know the facts that this wasn't a big, horrible Hollywood Satanist, as a lot of people want to think of. And he basically was a nobody. He was popular at a time because he had money, traveled around, and people wanted to get that from him. So he had a certain amount of celebrity at those particular times in the 20s and 30s. As the war approached and everything else, because of his contacts in the continent of Europe, he was contacted by intelligence organizations. Ultimately, he was a person who was pretty much fascinated and controlled by his own homosexuality. A lot of people accused him of being a woman hater. Well, not overly surprising, because the guy was basically leaned heavily towards homosexuality and would never admit he was homosexual because of the laws, which were pretty strict back then if they wanted to go after him. And certainly he would be a target, as so many people are, that are even occultists, that people claim to be devil worshippers when they're not. So the bottom line is that he wasn't a Satanist in the classic sense. He was into a lot of negative ego-based practices. Now, those negative practices were basically using different demonic forms to empower himself personally. Of course, we can't find any of that because he really was very unsuccessful. He couldn't sell his books. He couldn't win court cases. He didn't have good relationships. So he lived off of his money, being this flamboyant person, trying to get as much press as he could to try and sell something, or for people to have them open their doors to him. It's as simple as that. So this is a lot of nothing that people continue to carry his writings, which are mediocre and poor. But I guess after you've, which is very typical of Europeans and Brit, but after you've read endless books on Shakespeare and Dickens, and what are the other garbage that these classics are out there that have no content for modern man? You jump into trash, pulp fiction garbage written by a fantasist called Aleister Crowley. And apparently that's what caught the attention of these people in the 60s, which was a very strange time. And people wandered into, we'd think of hippies as these love monkeys wanting to go deep into that. But really, they were a group of very disenchanted, hateful people. And I've known some of these hippies, and they are some of the worst scum. They talk about the 60s like it was Nirvana, and they have the values of the lowest possible people you could have. But they like to talk about, the good days when everybody was loaded and screwing. So the whole idea is that, but they're rotten people. I don't know anybody who grew up in the 60s that wasn't a self-centered scumbag. They like to talk about all these things. When it comes to their families, their friends, and everything else, they operate like anybody else did, and sometimes even worse. They are self-centered, rotten people, and we could say the same thing about Aleister Crowley, who didn't go to those high ideals anyway. But taking his quotes out of context, taking the statement, "I'm the evilest man in the world," what does that even mean? What evil did he do? Well, I can't find much evil. He wrote a bunch of garbage, boring garbage, which I think is his greatest sin, and did much of nothing. He died in 1947. So, and he participated in the assisting the British people to a certain level that he could during World War II. Certainly not what evil people would do. And while he had a lot of contacts and did a lot of things in Deutschland, the bottom line is that he really had no affection. He wasn't a Nazi. He'd go anywhere you pay him. And if he can get some jollies out of it, sex and drugs, well, he's going to make sure he does that and adds that into the program. But most of his stuff, which people think are this hard, I remember going into a bookstore in Riverside, California, and they had, I forget which one of his books there. And I said, "Gee, that's an interesting book you have here." Pointed to it. It was in a case. And he said, "From what I understand, that's one of the darkest, evilest books you could get." I said, "Really? Aleister Crowley is one of the darkest, evilest books you can get?" Well, I said, "That's very interesting." Of course, I bought the book. I don't remember what it was, but I have trouble reading him because he's so boring. So the whole idea is that, this is what people think, which couldn't be further from the truth. And I'd like anybody to mention, if they have a background, well, what did he do that was so evil? He helped his country? He did a lot of sex? You mean like all of them? Like everybody out there who's a little deviant? I mean, we can't find anybody in the politics or most anywhere else that isn't kind of a deviant. Now we've got a huge problem with international pedophilia, which is sponsored by governmental agencies and law enforcement that are working with them and the military and everybody else. So the whole idea is that all of this is going on. None of these kind of things was he ever linked to in any way whatsoever. And they can fabricate all you want who's here. Well, he was in the same town where they built the atomic bomb. He gave them the knowledge to do it. You know, this is the kind of stuff you get from these people that you listen to on so many places or write things thinking that they got some information. And a lot of it is just plain made up by them, number one. Number two, they heard it from some guy in the back of a bar who they were humping sometime. This is the kind of crap you get. Nothing is ever checked out or validated. And we have to do that. Everything is just gossip and innuendo. And that's pretty much where we've got to. Everything is gossip, innuendo, made up lies that people want to believe is true because it fits their little personal conclusions. Not the truth, but what they want the truth to be. Well, there's no such thing as wanting what the truth to be. Creating your own truth is not a reality. Truth is truth. There's nothing higher than that. It's the state of Christ consciousness. It's the state of gnosis. And it's the state everybody should seek. Until next time.